Hello, and we'd like to open with land, with a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of making this meaningful to us, we've actually adapted a couple of land acknowledgements around, including that from Dawson College. So our conference is taking place at Dawson College on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy of Six Nations and the Anishinaabe Nation. Our Saltise community recognizes these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we meet today, and recognizes that this land has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and commit to informing ourselves about this truth in order to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of collaboration and reconciliation. And with that, I would like to invite the co-chair of Saltise, Elizabeth Charles.
So hi everyone. Thank you so much for attending. We are really thrilled that you're here. I do have stuff to say, and because we have a little bit of a lag here of time, just keep on, the people up front tell me when we're ready to rock and roll, and I'll speed up a little bit. We're ready to go. Great. Okay, so welcome. Michael and I welcome you to the 11th annual gathering of the Saltise community. We are delighted. Oh, sorry, I did say I would remove my mask so that you don't think that I'm all muffled. We are delighted to be once again back in person and once again at Dawson College. We are grateful and thank them for their continued support, hospitality, and generosity. And this comes deeply from the heart. We thank Deanne Gauvin, our Director General, for always supporting Saltise, starting way back 11 years ago. The last 2 years have taught us many things. Perhaps the most important, how special being face-to-face is. The last 2 years have also shown us some horrific things about the world. We've highlighted issues, gun violence, Black Lives Matter protests, reminders of the horror of residential school systems, the acknowledgement of challenges faced by many of our communities, the LGBTQ plus Asians. The world is amazingly frustrating, paradoxical, horrible. But all of these issues have brought important conversations to the foreground. In all these cases, education remains an important means for changing minds and hopefully for changing hearts. In fact, we have increasing evidence that the approaches that we talk about here, why we've come together here, active learning or student-centered approaches, can play an important part in equity and inclusiveness and bringing those to our classrooms. With this, we believe collaboration and opportunity to share perspectives can guide us forward. And I'm going to turn over back to my co-director, Michael, and talk about the conference.
Thank you. This year's conference theme, Collaborative Dialogues, the Role of Active Learning in Today's Educational Realities, describes these contradictions and opportunities. Over the last 10 months, the conference committee has engaged in thoughtful considerations and put together an amazing program including insightful keynotes and presentations that address these ideas. We hope you will take the opportunity to participate in as many sessions as possible. Before turning the stage over to the Director General of Dawson, we'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the amazing work accomplished by our two conference co-chairs, Sueli Bonifim and Bojana Krismanovic. Together with a dedicated conference committee, they have accomplished a Herculean task of producing both an in-person and online event. If it looks easy, I invite you to try that, doing that with a quarter of the events and people. We're extremely proud of them and hope you appreciate their efforts. And on that in that same spirit, we invite you to notice those wearing bright orange shirts. These are volunteers that have done an amazing job. The start of the conference was exceptionally smooth, and I've heard numerous reports of how helpful the volunteers were. So we deeply thank you for your contributions as well.
And without further ado, we invite Diane Gauvin, our Director General, to join us on stage.
So welcome to Dawson. Bienvenue tout le monde au Collège Dawson. So it's a pleasure to once again host a Saltise conference, a conference that is very important to what we do here at Dawson and very important to our students. Saltise is bringing a network of extraordinary pedagogues, all of you, together to celebrate and deepen the commitment to pedagogical connections, conversations, and communities. The conference themes invites participants to reflect on the role of active learning in the current educational climate. And Liz has talked about what the last 2 years have taught us. Certainly presence is, or the importance of being in close contact with people, I think we've all realized is important. Liz has also talked about some of the challenges of the last few years. This last year has been very difficult for Dawson and for other colleges who offer English education. I think that all of you are aware of what's going on, in particular really affects colleges, CEGEPs. In a letter that I wrote to the community, I reminded the employees that we must channel these negative emotions in a renewed commitment to our mission, to our community spirit, and which once again showed its unity in the face of diversity. We must continue to fulfill our mission with pride, to educate, to engage, to empower, and to enrich. So Saltise is an extraordinary vehicle. I'm a francophone, so véhicule, I can't say in English, I'm so sorry. It's a vehicle, it's one of those words that I'll need to practice. But it is a way to fulfill our mission. C'est aussi une occasion de travailler avec des collèges en enseignement supérieur à travers le Québec, autant anglophones que francophones. So I want to thank the Saltise team who's worked relentlessly to organize this conference, but also for the work that they do all year. So thank you to Liz, Charles, to Michael Dugdale, to Sueli, to Boyana, and to all of you who've contributed to this extraordinary conference. So thank you very much. I wish you a very nice conference. And thank you to the participants to show your interest in pedagogy and our students. So merci beaucoup. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Diane. So next job is to introduce Rob Cassidy. Rob Cassidy is our academic dean, and Rob will introduce the first keynote speaker today. So I invite Rob to come up to the stage. Just before he does, though, just to note, there will not be a time for a Q&A at the end. Hopefully, if we have some time, Stryker our keynote speaker, will encapsulate his presentation with a story, and we wanted to value the tradition of storytelling, and we think it's a nice way to to tie things together. So Q&A, if you do have questions, if you're listening or watching this online, you can still pose questions online. We will find a way to have them forwarded to Stryker and to our Saltise team. So we will try and get answers for that. And throughout the day, during breaks and at the Wine and Cheese, there will be opportunities to continue the conversation that we're about to start. So, Rob Cassidy, if you can come up and do the introductions, thanks.
So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I have a lot to say about our keynote speaker. But in speaking with him, because he's done a lot, and you'll see that. But I think the most important thing I can say right now, given the time constraints, is Stryker is here. He's a Métis guy, and he's got a lot of things, very interesting things to tell you. So I'm gonna turn it over to him, so you get to hear him and not me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. If we didn't have a technical problem or a delay or something, it wouldn't feel a bit Indigenous. We're always moving, changing, doing things differently, always at the last minute. We live in the moment. And so I'm living in the moment, and I want to say, Tanché, Stryker Calvez Dishnakashun, Amechif Nia, La Rivière Rouge, Doschin, Ma Famille, Saint-Pierre, Joly, Saint-Laurent, Manitoba, and puis La Montagne de Torchou, Oschiwak. So I just told you in Michif that I'm a Métis man. I told you where I come from because who I am is very, very important to me. More importantly, it tells you where my culture, where my knowledge, where my language comes from. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. I'm not here to speak for all Indigenous people. That's an impossible task. I'm here to speak from my own experiences. And I want to share with you the things I've learned, because that's what I've been doing for the last 7 years. So I'll get you, I don't have control, so I'm going to be saying click a lot. I apologize if you don't like that word. Click. All right, click again. The journey here is we all get started on these roads for different reasons. And I once read a quote from Martin Luther King, who is a wise man. And he talked about how the road is paved with good intentions. And good intentions aren't bad. They're just the starting point. So many people get involved in this for good intentions. And I'm very glad that you've done that. I want you to continue to look for good intentions. But what's really important is that we move beyond good intentions. Click. Where we want to go, click, is we want to learn how to be good in tension. Change is difficult. Change means taking everything that you've ever been taught, everything that you know, everything that you're comfortable, and shifting it a little bit. And sometimes that creates a little discomfort, sometimes it creates a lot of discomfort. But if we truly want to achieve the goals that our good intentions are aiming at, then we have to become good at tension. And when you're good in tension, right, you can manage the technical difficulties of a presentation that doesn't start when you think so, and you just go with the flow. All right, so I want to invite all of you to think about how you can move from good intentions to being good in tension. And more importantly, anticipate tension. Tension isn't an indicator that you've done something wrong. Most of the time, it's an indicator that you've done something right. Click. As I said, I'm a Métis man. It's very important that you understand that because I'm not speaking for the First Nations people or the Inuit. I'm here speaking from my perspective. And it's important for you to know my truth. I was born into a family that hid their Métis, their Indigenous identity, right? We had lost our land, we'd lost houses, we'd lost jobs, we'd lost economic prosperity. I wasn't taught how to thrive, I was taught how to survive. That was the Métis way for a long time. And in learning about myself, there was always these hints about a Métis heritage, Métis uncles. I was always talked to about Louis Riel. I was a family member. But I was never told why or how or anything like that. And so I don't speak from a place or as a person who has actually known his identity his whole life. I have actually had to decolonize myself first. And in doing that, I've come to understand who I am with more clarity, because I didn't live a life from childhood where you innocently accept all those things. I've had to think about the society that I was in and the society that I was moving towards. And in doing so, I made a lot of conscious decisions and I learned a lot of lessons. And so I just want to start off by saying that I am not speaking from a traditional place. I'm speaking as a modern Métis man. That doesn't make me less Indigenous, by the way. It just makes me somebody who's fighting colonization, which is an Indigenous experience. Okay, click. So I'm going to mention that I come from a really famous Métis family. I already hinted that Louis Riel was family. This is a picture of my grandmother and grandfather. My grandmother was born, she's the first cousin of Louis Riel. She was born on a bison raid where they were hunting bison, and her mother was pregnant and racing along on this Red River wagon that did not have shocks. Right, and she was born on the Cypress Hill, so we called her La Cypress. She is a powerful woman. Métis people come from a society where women are equal to men. There is no difference, right? We come from a place where we live in sister communities where you can come in, you'll see all these different names in the communities, but what you don't realize is that they're all sisters, right? In our world, we believe in equality, gender equality, and I've taken that on as part of who I am. I've always believed in that, and I believe it's an important part of who I am. So I just want to acknowledge my mamère, who gets my great-great-great-great mamère, who doesn't get as much credit as she has. I also want to recognize this fellow here because he's part of the group that started the Red River Resistance. When I grew up, it was the Rebellion, so every now and then I slip. But as somebody who started that, they were standing up for themselves, and I have to honor them because they're my ancestors. They're very important to me. And I don't know if you noticed, I tied this orange ribbon on this today. I tied this on here for a purpose because of all the children that went to residential schools, and that includes some of my family members. Some of those people never got to go back to their family. And I want to remember and I want to honor these people because of them I am here today. And I'm here to make sure that my children know that and that everybody knows that. We come from a strong, powerful place of equality. We have lots of values and beliefs to share with you. And I hope you guys will listen and hear what you need to hear and move that forward. Click. All right, so I think you heard in the panel discussion today, and I'm going to take a moment to give a shout out to that panel. I feel like I could leave academia today and it would be okay. I feel like the students that are coming up behind me are so much more powerful and stronger and smarter than I am. So I'm humbled to be here in your presence, and I want to say merci for starting us off in a good way today. I come from a background, as I've hinted, where I come from a family that's very rich and powerful. I already started off by talking about who I was in my own language, telling you about where I come from so you know me. Positionality is at the heart of Indigenous peoples. We know each other because we talk about where we come from, and we honor that. And when someone tells me where they come from and when they talk about that, I respect it and I acknowledge it and I try to learn from it. That is what I think is beautiful about Indigenous peoples is that we already accept diversity as a big part of what we do, and we use it as a tool when we're learning about inclusion from when we're children all the way up. Right? So I grew up in a non-traditional way, but I've learned a lot from those processes. I can't see my slides, so I can't quite hint myself. But my first start was started talking as an Indigenous man. Being an Indigenous person is more important than having a PhD. And this is what I talked to Rob earlier. I said I was really embarrassed when the panel discussion was calling me Dr. Calvez. Because in my community, they don't care that I'm Dr. Calvez. They care that I'm Stryker. They care that I'm authentic and genuine, that I can be trusted, and that I participate in my community with my full heart and open mind. That's more important to me as well. It doesn't say that my PhD isn't important. It's given me opportunities. It's given me opportunities to be here with you today. It's given me opportunities to stand up for my community in ways that my community has never been able to stand up. And I am not saying that education isn't valuable, but what I'm saying here is that your person, who you are, your genuine self is more important, and then the education complements that. And that is what I've done with my education, is I've complemented myself. I haven't done it because I need to do it. I did it because I wanted to do it. And I have met so many young people that have such strong potential, and I've gauged them to get an education. But unfortunately for many of those young students, I've actually had to help them to understand that they're going to have to resist the system. They're going to have to find themselves and be stronger because of it, so that when they go through the system, they make choices that are theirs to make rather than being imposed upon to do them because they're asked to do them. And that's what I'm here to ask you to do today, is to think about how you can change the system so that it can be better. And I'm doing that because I have 3 children, right? And they're growing up as Métis children. And they're being gifted that from the moment they begin. And I love it because my daughter, who was in grade 3, corrected her teacher. And the teacher tried to put her in her place, and then my daughter turned around and said, well, I've talked to the elders. Do you want me to go verify what you're saying? And the teacher said, no, let's just listen to Autumn. I never could have done in grade 3. So I'm very lucky to be here, and I'm very lucky to be giving my children something I wasn't given. The other thing I want to say is that I have power and privilege now. Power and privilege is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. We all strive to have it in one way or another because it gives us security, it gives us opportunity. It's how we use power and privilege. I grew up with nothing. I did not have anything. I was taught to, as I said before, to survive. I wasn't taught to thrive. But somewhere along the way, when I found my Indigenous identity, I found the way in which I could thrive. And in doing that, I've become somebody who has power and privilege. And now I use that power and privilege to benefit my community. The other thing that I have is I'm white passing. And I want to acknowledge that. This has been a huge asset in my life. It has given me, when I didn't know who I was, given me opportunities that I didn't know I had. And until I started delving into my family history and the community that I belong to, that I started to realize those advantages. And I still have those advantages. But I've also experienced racism. I've experienced it vicariously while others say things that are not nice to other people I care about and love. I've heard my family members being harmed, and I've been harmed because people say I'm not Indigenous enough because I don't look right. Racism is a huge problem. It's something that we all have to acknowledge. It exists. Prejudice in one way or another exists in every community in Canada. And I want to acknowledge the people that experience it, and I want to say, I'm sorry. We're here today to change that. Maybe not today, but I hope in the future we can find a place where we can all just love each other. Okay, I need to drink some water here because I've just talked myself into this moment. I'm going to say click. All right, Indigenous knowledge. It's unlike Western knowledge. You can't have property, you can't own it as an intellectual right. I'm going to speak faster now because I want to get through some material. I want to have time to be able to tell you the story. Indigenous people, the community owns our knowledge. And some of you are researchers who work with Indigenous community. You know you have to get permission to use the knowledge that you borrow from them or you use or that you learn. I just want to acknowledge that the knowledge I'm sharing with you, I was gifted by elders and knowledge keepers, people who are wiser, smarter than me. None of them have PhDs, but they are so much more better than I, and if they could have been here, they would be the ones that would be doing this keynote address. But because they're in community, looking after community, I'm here as their spokesperson, but I do not own their knowledge. And so I want to acknowledge these elders for everything that they've done for me and gifted to me. Click. Okay, before we begin, what is reconciliation? This is why we're here. This is why I'm here. All right, reconciliation. Anybody notice that I put brackets around the R and the E? I've been doing this now for a couple of years. It's really important. The idea of reconciliation came out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. At least the idea didn't come from there, but that's where it started as a genesis in Canada. It's a term and an idea and a concept that people have embraced in no other way, because we've had many reports that preceded that commission's report that nobody listened to. This is the tool that we're using now today to have these conversations. But reconciliation is about bringing into balance a relationship that used to have harmony, and now we're bringing it back into harmony. Indigenous people never had harmony with the newcomers to Turtle Island. We have come here, newcomers came here, and there was always an imbalance. And so what we talk about is, we're talking about conciliation. That is when you take things and put them into balance. That's when you take disputing or conflict and you move it into harmony. And so oftentimes when we're talking about reconciliation, what we're really talking about is conciliation. The important reason I bring this up is because reconciliation is not known. We've never had a time in our past where we had reconciliation. So we're moving into a future that is unknown. And that unknowingness is the biggest hurdle and challenge that we need to overcome. So for some people, reconciliation is a long, dark tunnel. Some of you can see the light at the end of it. Some of you are just getting into that tunnel. I don't want you to be scared. This is normal. Like, as I said, reconciliation is something we don't have anything to model off of or anything to move forward. People who are further along, click, will see reconciliation maybe as a topsy-turvy, squiggly line that goes to the future. There's lots of ups and downs, lots of forwards and backwards. This is not a bad thing. This is living in the moment. This is the truth. When we are going to learn about something that we've never had, something that we want to desperately build, then we need to be prepared to go all over the map. And when you're willing to go all over the map, that's when you find opportunities that you didn't realize were there. And so I want to acknowledge that reconciliation isn't, click, it isn't a trend. It isn't a moment where we get to sort of push past it like stats class, right? Yeah, I didn't push past it, but others I've heard have. But it's not something that we want to push. It's definitely not a square peg being hammered into a circle hole, right? Reconciliation is more than that. Reconciliation from my perspective, can you see reconciliation in that flag? Anybody? Yeah. Right in the center, X marks the spot. I heard the panel discussion talk about ethical space. Well, I believe ethical space is the center between those two circles. One circle is not bigger. It's certainly not leaning and pushing on the other circle. There's no overlap. It's two places coming together. But more importantly, it's an infinite thing. It's going back and forth, back and forth. That's where the learning comes. It's a continuous in and out, back and forth, right? Reconciliation, from my perspective, is the Métis symbol, the infinity symbol. That's what I was taught. My grandmother came from a First Nation background. My grandfather came from a European background, and they didn't dominate each other. My grandmother would never have that, right? She was a tough woman. Like I said, she gave birth on a Red River wagon. All right, so what they do, though, is they came together and they gave birth to something beautiful. They gave birth to me and my family and to all the other families that call themselves Métis. And we didn't just become First Nation, we didn't become European. We were something new. We had a language, we had culture, we had an identity that was different. And we loved it. We loved who we were. I believe that reconciliation is that. And I think if you think about Canada, we are doing things in this area of reconciliation that no other country can. And we have the opportunity to build that love into our entire society. And for me, that's what I think reconciliation is. It's about looking forward to the future where we can all be together without having to be different or to be different, right? That's the whole thing. We can just be. I think reconciliation is all of us in the field. We know with the winds blowing in different directions, we're all standing there hoping that we won't get trampled on and stepped on. But what reconciliation really is when we band together in our Indigenous and non-Indigenous identity, and then more importantly, we braid together in a positive way that reinforces without having to become each other. Our Indigenous communities do not want a bunch of non-Indigenous people running around our communities trying to be Indigenous. We'll do that on our own, any more than you want us to be non-Indigenous. What we want to do is we want to learn from each other. And how many X marks the spots is in that sweetgrass braid, right? There are multiple opportunities over and over and over again where we will meet and understand and support each other. Reconciliation is about humility, respect. It's about making mistakes. It's about learning from those mistakes. And it's about moving forward with good intentions. And as I said before, we don't know what the future looks like. We are just making our way to the best ability we can. Our good intentions being turned into being good with tension. Not because we're scared, but because we think it's worthwhile. Oh yeah, I've learned some lessons along the ways, guys. That's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to get a sore neck from this PowerPoint presentation. I'm trying to speed up. I had a little speech there, but I'm going to move forward because I think we hinted at this. We did a land acknowledgement, but what's really important is we recognize that Canada is an Indigenous space. It was always an Indigenous space, and it will always be an Indigenous space, right? If you look at the map, we have many treaties, and they go all the way back to the first time when non-Indigenous people arrived. Right? And they showed up here and they made the friendship treaties and eventually made other treaties, and then we made land acknowledgement or land agreements, right? And then we still have the gray areas. Those gray areas aren't open and free. Those are places that are going to have land agreements someday soon, right? We're in negotiation. So there isn't a place you can't go in Canada where you aren't in an Indigenous space. And that's one of the myths that colonization brought to us, was the idea that this was open, free, empty land as if we weren't here. Well, I think this map shows you that that is not true, right? So the truth of the matter is we are in an Indigenous place. We are now called Canada, but that renaming it doesn't take away from what it was originally and what it'll always be. Now, I had to go out and pick pictures of Canada. There were so many gorgeous pictures out there, and I was looking for something that sort of emphasized the beauty of Canada, the diversity, right? I did put 2 pictures from the prairies on there. I'm sorry you guys don't live there, but it's a beautiful place. Canada is diverse in its land. It's gorgeous. I've been to every part of Canada except in the north, and there I have been inspired. When I grew up in the prairies, I thought there's no more beautiful place. Then I went west, then I went east. Canada is gorgeous from place to place. It's got rugged beauty, it's got intelligence, it just speaks to you in these different places. Why am I talking about Canada's beauty? Because Indigenous people are of the land. That beauty that you see in those pictures is a representation of Indigenous peoples, right? The differences you see in those pictures are a representation of the differences in Indigenous peoples. If you see a change in the geography, you will see a change in the language or the culture or the histories of Indigenous peoples. Indigenous people, we're not one group of people, we're 3 distinct groups. Within those 3 distinct groups, we have an enormous amount of diversity. You know, there's over 650 different First Nation communities, but they all have their own unique history, identities, and so forth. There are over 50 different Inuit communities that speak different dialects. And the Métis people, we have adapted to the land. We have Michif that is Francais, that's Cree, that's Dene. Our language shifts and changes with our grandmothers and with the land that we live on. Indigenous people are intimately tied to this land. And so when you see changes in the land, you see changes in Indigenous people. People always talk, and I've heard this in land acknowledgements, that the Indigenous people are the original owners, stewards of the land. And I'm going to explain why this isn't true. Because we are of the land. You know, before I started, I did a quick prayer to great-grandmother, which I call the land, and great-grandfather, the sky. Those are the 2 that guide me and provide me with the wisdom to do good things, to try and stay on the straight and narrow. It's important that we recognize the value and importance of the land in knowing Indigenous people. Land acknowledgements aren't just a nicety, although I know we love that when we walk by and say, how you doing? But we don't really stop long enough to hear the response, right? So it's more of a nicety than a truth. Well, land acknowledgements aren't that. And every now and then you're going to hear somebody say, well, they just did it really quickly, or it doesn't have meaning, or it's lost meaning. The person who puts the meaning back into it is the person who's speaking it. You need to understand that when you come to speak to Indigenous people, when you are doing the land acknowledgement, you are acknowledging the wisdoms, the great-grandmother and the great-grandfather that gave my people, my family, my communities, gave them everything that makes them who they are today. That is not a small gesture. That's not an insignificant one. It's really important to understand the land because that is who gave birth to us. And we aren't owners of the land. We are of the land. It's important that we understand that it was King George in 1763 that sort of gave us ownership, and he was never been to Canada, never came to Canada, and never spoke to an Indigenous person, but he understood the importance of Indigenous people to the success of the British conquest of this land. And so he made a deal that we could own the land. He gave us that, which was very gracious of him. I bring this up because one of the things I did in decolonizing and learning who I was, I had to understand the world that I had been a part of. And let's be honest with each other. The Western world is hierarchical. It has categories. We learn in that way. It's that reductionist perspective. It's post-positivism. It's positive. It's everything about understanding the world in small, discrete amounts and seeing if we can rebuild it. But at the top of that pyramid is men and women. And if you're religious, maybe God is up there, but men and women right below, right? So it's important to recognize that we have hierarchy. And this is the Western world, and we use this because it's important to understand that reconciliation is about interculturalism. I don't need you to understand my people completely. I just need you to understand yourself in relationship to us. You are the most important variable in that relationship because only you know who you are and what you can do. And knowing your culture, knowing the places that you come from is important. Click. Because when you think about the type of relationships that the Western world has with the world around it, they're dominant, right? You think about all the animals that they liked, they domesticated. Animals they didn't like, what did they do with them? They hunted them down and got rid of them. Well, they hunted down some of the animals they really liked, like the beaver, but that's a different story, right? They did the same with plants, right? We call them weeds, or they're cash crops, right? Or they are beautiful flowers in our flower bed, right? We have this discrete relationship with things that are either for us or against us, and we engage in that. And that includes the land, right? When a hill gets in the way of building a highway, we get rid of the hill, right? That's the relationship that the Western world has outward. But the Indigenous worldview is different, and this is where I want to teach you a little bit about interculturalism in relationship to Indigenous people, is that we are different. I'm going to share with you, if I have time, I want to do an origin story, but what I want you to hear of today, and we'll look at right now, is that in all of our origin stories, it was the animals and the plants, and some of them are God, they got together and they realized these two-leggeds, they're useless. They are running around and they are going to die off in a heartbeat if we don't step up and help them out. And that's what they did. They got together and they didn't just give us food, but they taught us how to see the world, to understand the shifts in the seasons, to understand the plants that were medicinal, those that were poisonous. They gave us purpose, they gave us reason, they gave us understanding. And in Indigenous people, we recognize that. Click. And it's created a different way in which we see the world. We see the world as ourselves in relationship to it. And that is very different because we have the same categories, guys. We still talk about plants and we still talk about animals, but how we relate to them is very different. And that doesn't mean that Westerners don't have a similar relationship. Lots of people do have that relationship with the world around them. But when it comes to the way we structure our institutions and the places that we spend time in, it tends to be more Western, more about hierarchy and less about relationships. And reconciliation is we're going to have to understand those two differences, not as an invitation for you to become Indigenous, although you guys are living here on our land, and I guarantee you the great-grandmother and great-grandfather have not been sitting around doing nothing. I think they've been working on you guys slowly. All right, so you guys are becoming a little bit Indigenous every year, every season you go through. Right? And it's important to understand that we need to know the differences. So when we talk about the same thing, we talk about the land acknowledgement, we see people talking about it from a Western side. It's about we're here doing this, they turn it into a Western thing. It's about teaching, it's about these things. When Indigenous people do it, I'm recognizing that I'm in a space and place that has a whole set of wisdoms and knowledges and ideas, and that I invoke those spirits and those ancestors of this place to come and help us and support us in whatever it is we want to achieve in that day. Two different ways of looking at land acknowledgements, right? This interculturalism is important because I want to know, is how are you guys going to, that's bad, I just got taught that lesson. How are you all going to do this in the classroom? How are you going to do this with your colleagues? Right? How are you going to embrace this difference, right? How are you going to show people this? And I've met people from a Western perspective that have that very strong relational understanding. So I know what happens in the Western world, and I've met Indigenous people who are very hierarchical, trust me. We're not an exclusive world, right? But there are differences in the way of view, and the way we approach things tends to be more relational, and I'll go into that a bit more later. When you think about the place that you guys exist, right, we're all individuals who have been cultured, right? We were born into a culture. We were taught how to succeed within that culture. Our parents taught us the right and wrong according to the society that we're in. It helped us to understand how to be successful, how to achieve the things that we need to achieve. Then we learned through education and institutions how to be even more of a stronger cultural fit. Culture fit is an enormous part of being successful in Western society. There is, I'm getting some shakes, and I appreciate that, thank you. Just reaffirming me, that's good. It's important that we recognize that culture fit becomes a big part of our institution, and it happens in our classrooms, even if we have good intentions, right? It happens in the way we practice our teaching, it happens in the way we talk, it happens in the way we pick people to answer questions for us. It happens everywhere, it's pervasive. But if you embrace the idea of building reconciliation into your institution or into your classroom or into your workspace, you need to understand the context around you. It's important that we live in a cultured space, right? We need to know that. If we don't recognize our cultured beings, if we don't recognize our cultured spaces, then we aren't going to be able to engage in reconciliation. We're not going to engage in an inclusive environment around us because we'll be at the mercy of culture. And culture is pervasive and it is all-powerful, right? People who don't fit the culture, who don't follow those rules, they're the ones that get ostracized, excused, they're the ones that get excluded, oppressed. They're the ones that are victims, and they're the ones when we're not feeling good, if we make them feel better, by comparison, we're better off. And so we don't even do it intentionally, right? Why are we doing this? Why are we engaging in reconciliation? This is really important. We're doing it for Canada, you know, we're doing it for Quebec, or in my case, I'm doing it for Saskatchewan. We're doing it for our institution, you're doing it for you. But the most important reason why we're doing all of this work is we're doing it for our children. You know, we all care about our children. We want them to have the best life we can possibly have. We want them to be better off than ourselves. That's the one universal truth that we all share in common. And so I bring it up over and over and over again. Think about the children. Let's not fight about what me and you think about. Let's think about what our children need. And we don't know who our children are going to marry. We don't know who they're going to fall in love with, right? And what our grandchildren are going to look like, right? We want our children and their children and their children to have a better life. So let's do it for them. We all care about the future. We care about their future. And for Indigenous people, we put our children in the middle of our circle. They're the most sacred thing. We know them to be our future. And in many Indigenous languages, children and the future are the same word or a similar word. There's reasons why institutions, why people are struggling, right? That has to do with fear, right? People are afraid of making mistakes. I'm going to have to step over, click. You can click a few times, actually. They don't know where to start. They're afraid of wasting time, right? Because our time is the biggest, huge agenda. When we're in institutions, we're always pressed to go further, go faster, right? And so time's a huge issue, right? So I don't have time now, but I have good intentions, so I'll do it in the future, right? How do you deal with the tension of time, right? That's part of reconciliation. Click. Right? Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, I can go this way. Oh, see, guys? I couldn't have done that without you. Thank you. All right, it's trying to push me back. It's going to be a war. All right, the challenges of it being too difficult. You guys have already started. This is not too difficult. You're sitting here listening to me. I'm hoping you're doing that with an open mind and an open heart, right? That is the beginning. That's not so difficult. Listening is a big part of a reconciliation. Listening with your heart, not just your mind, is a big part of reconciliation, right? Tokenism. You're afraid that your gestures aren't going to be real. Well, I guess if you walk up to somebody and say, how are you doing? You walk past them when they start to speak to you, that is a token gesture. But if you pause to listen, that is not a token gesture. Just pausing to listen makes everything you do a positive. It gives us an opportunity to be ourselves, maybe express something, maybe share something, or maybe just feel human. That is an important part of reconciliation. Personal harm. This one is true, right? This is the world where Indigenous people are starting to take back their power and starting to demand people treat them with respect, right? I talk about all the Indigenous faculty members that came before me. They had the warrior voice, right? They had to come into their room and pound their fists on the table just to be heard, just to be allowed to speak. But we're past that now. We still have people who are using their warrior voice, but we have people who have grown up with being heard, who have understood themselves, know themselves in ways that we haven't done. They aren't here to cause personal harm. But if you're afraid of personal harm, then you need to ask yourself, why am I so scared of that? This isn't about us. This is about you, right? We are an inclusive community. When people come in and they support our community and they don't try and tell us what to do, they just ask, what can I do, right? We embrace them because they feel like they're part of it. And there are many non-Indigenous people who are part of our community. They are now part of our community and we treat them like family members. That is what you guys are engaging in. So don't let your fear of personal harm or mistakes be your challenge. Click. And of course, what are the benefits to me? Well, if you have children, I can tell you that that's going to be a benefit to them. The benefits to you is that there's more than one worldview out there. There's more than one truth, right? As we move into climate change and you're looking at that upside down triangle, what do you think we have to speak to, right? Living in relationship with the world around us, we've been doing that for thousands and thousands of years. Maybe it's time that the Western world think about flipping their triangle and join us in your own canoe, right? Okay. Right? It's important to understand that these things, these fears, they're legitimate. I don't want you to think that they're not. The thing is you need to come to terms with them. You need to acknowledge that you have fears, that you are worried about engaging in reconciliation in the right way with the right person, and how do I get started? Those are all legitimate. Don't let yourself unconsciously defend against getting started and moving towards the tension. The fact that you have fear means that you've already identified the first tension that you need to navigate. Right? And tension is an important thing. If you have dissonance in there, that's tension. That's like you wanting to protect yourself. But if you open yourself up to the fact that you're feeling it, then you can deal with it. If you don't acknowledge it, you're probably going to engage in one of these defense mechanisms to protect yourself. And I'm not going to say that's bad, because you do need to look after yourself. But I'm going to say that there's a chance and an opportunity for you to come back and think about that again. And think about the dissonance, and then think about what is it that's causing me to feel this way, and how can I move past it. And that's your first lesson for reconciliation, is how do I personally move past the tension. But I just want to acknowledge that there are a lot of fears, but there's two primal fears that every human being experiences. One is the fear of the unknown. And remember, I put that big dark tunnel up there. You guys laughed because you thought, what, that's a silly slide. But it's so important, because you think about your personal journey. Some of you might actually be staring into a long dark tunnel and you don't know what's at the end of it. So should I go into it? How many people just run into a cave? You see a cave, you just run in there thinking, oh, this is going to be great? No, exactly. It's that fear of the unknown, right? Even babies at 4 years or 4 months old have a fear of the unknown, right? That's a primal fear. So that's part of where that tension comes from. The other one is, and this is really important, I want you to understand, some people have an intolerance for uncertainty, right? Some of us are adaptive. We just love new experiences. We embrace them, we jump into them, and we just thrive in those experiences. Others need a structured way to see the world. That is not good or bad. It just is what they are. It is. When you're engaging people who are interested in knowing what you have or what you're sharing or why you're doing what you're doing, don't hold them to be like you, because that is not what reconciliation is, not inclusion, it's not equitable, right? What I want you to do is think about the fact is do they have what it takes to adapt, or do they need more safety, more time, more security? What can I give them that they need to be able to feel secure and support their journey forward? If you can embrace them for where they are at and help them, you're doing it with kindness and generosity. And that's what the elders keep telling me. If we don't do reconciliation with kindness and generosity, then we might as well stop. So don't hold people against for them needing or having an intolerance for uncertainty. It's not fair, it's not kind, and it's not generous. Okay, so what can we do from here? I can't sit still. All right, move forward. See, I had my slide, I had my notes. I don't have them right now. Click. All right, oh yeah, this is good. This is where we get into action, because everybody asked me, what should I be doing? All right, so I think the panel pointed this out right at the beginning, so I felt like maybe I just glossed over this, but maybe you guys haven't seen the same things the panel has seen. Your positionality. It's important to know who you are as a cultured being. If you don't acknowledge that, you don't own it, you don't understand it, then it is in control. You are not in control, right? Western world has that dominant hierarchical approach to life, and that means that if you're enculturated in that space and place, and I'm not passing judgment, guys, this is not about good or bad, but if you've been enculturated in that space, then you don't realize that you have a dominant side of you, right? Because that's what culture does. It enculturates us how to be successful. And whether we're kind and generous, but still understand that there is a hierarchical worldview out there and that we need to navigate that, we then begin to teach our children, we teach others that we are engaging in that cultural perspective. And that is what you need to be successful in some way. So I'm not negating that at all. But what I'm saying is if you want to embrace a future where that's not as dominant, it's not as important, then you need to know yourself as a cultured person. And once you start down that path, once you start to see yourself and understanding the knowledges and ideas that you were gifted from your family and people around you, then you have the opportunity to use that for success. Use it for what you want it to be rather than letting it use you for what it wants it to be. And we do not want to continue to propagate colonization. That dominant worldview, it has been very successful, but it's maybe been too successful if you ask great-grandmother, right? We need to change, we need to shift, we need to think about the future in different ways, and that includes looking at reconciliation through a reconciliation lens. And so once you go down that path, you start to anticipate and see differences. Once you start seeing differences, you start to look for understanding with those differences. Once you start to have that understanding, you start to embrace the world in a non-judgmental way. It's no longer about right and wrong, it's just about these are things different. We'll do it differently, you do it differently, let's negotiate how we want to do this together, maybe differently, right? And once you start to do that, you're moving towards the path of understanding the world as it truly exists rather than the one that exists as you'd like to believe it does. Once you're moving in this direction, you have cultural awareness. You're starting to understand the world as a cultured space. As you engage it, and you guys are all engaging in it right now because you guys were curious enough to come and listen to me, and I want to thank you. Merci. That was a michif merci, not a merci in French. Or a butchered French. So I just want to say that the first step is understanding culture, right? Understanding culture. Once you have that, then you can become culturally sensitive, right? You can start to recognize the differences around you. It's important that once you know this in yourself, that you start to move this forward into the world and the spaces and places, right? You don't have to do it like a militant person. You can do it with kindness and generosity, helping people share in their understanding of difference and knowing the difference is good, not bad. And moving in that direction. You share with others and help them find their way onto that path with you, right? Well, as you do that, you become more competent, right? As you become more competent, you can engage in other issues that have more tension. Because the goal is not to avoid the tension. The goal is to become good in tension, right? And that's important because there are a lot of tense spaces out there that you need to navigate. We need allies, we need accomplices, we need people who are willing to take on the bigger challenges, right? Like the panel of graduate students, they are taking on some of the biggest challenges in our society. I hope you guys are super successful. But that's important that you get culturally competent because that was what leads to being able to be culturally safe. And I'm going to tell you something that I sometimes get locked into. I don't have to look at it right now. I create cultural safety for my Indigenous community, and I know that there are a lot of professional practices that are talking about creating cultural safety for people different. But believe it or not, there's irony here, is I also create cultural safety for the dominant group. That seems at odds, and I've had a lot of my Indigenous colleagues ask me why I do that. And I do that because who has all the power and privilege? And if I create a space that you don't feel comfortable in, that doesn't teach you about who you are and how the tension is important and how that tension leads to good changes, then you'll take all your power and privilege and you'll go play in a different sandbox. It's also about security. Remember, I talked about those defense mechanisms, right? If you are going to be good in tension, you need to feel secure in some ways. And security comes in all different ways, right? Sometimes it's a safe space, right? Sometimes it's psychological safety, right? There are different ways in which we need to teach each other. But more importantly, I create culturally safe spaces for non-Indigenous people because it models what I want my children to experience. I do not want to teach my kids about self-defense so that they can go to university. I want to teach them that they can love each other and love the people around them and go and have great discussions and learn from really smart people about the world around them in a good way. A way that allows them to embrace all of their gifts in a way that enhances who they are rather than diminishes them. So I create cultural safety for everybody. It's not just for those people who have been oppressed and harmed. And that's important that you do that too. You create cultural safety because I don't get invited to all the cool wine and cheese events where there's not many non-Indigenous people. So I need you to go in there and model cultural safety for them to have those conversations and to push it forward. Okay, so when you think about this, you need to stop just making safe spaces for Indigenous people, right? You have to make safe spaces for everyone. Right? Indigenous people might be an objective or an outcome that you're aiming for, but it's really important that you make spaces that are safe for everybody. That doesn't mean that Indigenous people don't need safe spaces, guys. I'm just saying it shouldn't be your only focus, especially if you're working in a space that has the ability to impose changes in an institution, create those places. It's also important that you know yourself in relationship to Indigenous people. As I said, you guys are all living on Indigenous lands. Right? There isn't a place you can't go where you're not interacting with indigeneity, right? So it's important that you start to come to terms with that, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about the land acknowledgement. The land acknowledgement is a reminder to people that we are in an Indigenous space, right? That is important because it's a starting point for you having a relationship with an Indigenous space, and once you have that relationship, it's only a small step to having a relationship with Indigenous people because you start to understand who they are because of the land around them. I want you to take your first steps. It's important to take your first steps. There is no one way to do it, right? I told you that we are all different. Sweetgrass is, oh, I got the warning, 5-minute warning. Okay, thank you. That's, you guys, okay. I want to get to a story. I'm going to speed up, guys, and I'm going to give you the story, and I might go 2 minutes over. I apologize. Okay, it's important that you do this and that you remember your one read, right? But you coming together creates more strength and you support it together, right? But each one of those grasses, sweet grasses, is important. So you're not going to lose yourself. You should remember you have your own unique gifts. Your unique gifts add to the flavor of reconciliation in a way that you can't do if you go to a group norm. So own yourself, own the abilities you have, and then use those gifts to help other people. And more importantly, have fun. I have more fun with my Indigenous colleagues than I do with my non-Indigenous colleagues because we'll be talking about the worst, most evil thing in the world, and we'll be cracking jokes and having fun. Because life is real. It is true, but it doesn't mean that we can't enjoy the moments, right? And so we're always having a good time. We're always making jokes and supporting each other. And part of the reason is we're taught in our culture that when you're laughing, when you're fully laughing, you're 100% present. Nobody laughs at something in the distant future or in the distant past. You are 100% there. So laughter is how we stay present. So I invite you to do that, and I invite you to Google Stryker TED Talk, and it'll teach you about reconciliation through the metaphor of teenage dating. And that was somebody challenged me to do that, and I thought, okay, I didn't think they'd actually pick me to do the TED Talk, and then I felt bad for having to do that. Okay, you guys all understand that faculty can change classrooms, staff can change policies and practices. I'm not going to go into that in any great detail. This is the model that I like to use. I want to remind you, don't start by adding content to your classrooms. Start by indigenizing your teaching philosophy. Understand yourself and your teaching approach and then indigenize it. Once you indigenize it, then your learning outcomes will change, then the way you approach what content to put in there, you'll have purpose and meaning, which will then drive how you want to develop your structure in the classroom, the type of courses you get involved, how you do that, whether it's a circle or peer discussion groups. There are different ways, but it's driven from your teaching philosophy to your learning outcomes, to your content. It has purpose. And when you have purpose in your classroom, then you're teaching meaningful reconciliation. Okay, this is where I get to do my story. And I'm going to read, this is important because every time I go to an elder with a question, they give me a story back. The reason they give me a story back is because in Indigenous culture, you don't impose on somebody's learning journey. You give them something and you allow them to find the truth in there. So I'm going to invite you, after hearing everything I've said today, I'm going to tell a story, and I want you to lean into it and see what is important to you. And I guarantee you, none of us are going to pick up the same thing, all right? But I want to end in the way that I was taught, and I apologize for going over, but I will be quick. Click. And by the way, this is not my story. This is a story from this book. It's a beautiful book. If you're looking for something that's really valuable and worth starting your journey on, I recommend you take this, give this a good chance. All right, this is by Robin Kimmer. In the beginning, there was Sky World. She fell like a maple seed pirouetting on autumn breeze. A column of light streamed from a hole in the sky world, marking her path where only darkness had been before. It took her a long time to fall. In fear or maybe hope, she clutched a bundle tightly in her hand. Hurtling down, she saw only dark water below, but in the emptiness there were many eyes gazing up at the sudden shaft of light. They saw there was a small object, a mere dust mote in the beam. As it grew closer, they could see it was a woman, arms outstretched, long black hair billowing as she spiraled towards them. The geese nodded at one another and rose together from the water in a wave of goose music. Imagine that, goose music. She felt the beat of their wings as they flew beneath her to break her fall. Far from the only home she'd ever known, she caught her breath at the warm embrace of soft feathers as they gently carried her down, and so it began. The geese could not hold the woman above the water for much longer, and so they called the council to decide what to do. Resting on their wings, she saw them all gather, loons, otters, swans, beavers, fish of all kinds. A great turtle floated in the midst and offered his back for her to rest upon. Gratefully, she stepped from the goose's wings onto the dome of his shell. The others understood that she needed land for her home and discussed what they might do to serve her need. The deep divers among them had heard of mud at the bottom of the water and agreed to go find some. Loon dove first, but the distance was too far, and after a long while he surfaced with nothing to show for his efforts. One by one, the other animals offered to help: otter, beaver, sturgeon. But the depths, the darkness, the pressures were too great for even the strongest swimmers. They returned gasping for air with their heads ringing. Some did not return at all. Soon only little Muskrat was left, the weakest diver of all. He volunteered to go while the others looked on doubtfully. His small legs flailed as he worked his way downward, and he was gone a very long time. They waited and waited for him to return, fearing the worst for their relative, and before long a stream of bubbles rose with a small, limp body of the muskrat. He had given his life to aid this helpless human. But then the others noticed that his paw was clenched tightly, and when they opened it, there was a small handful of mud. Turtle said, "Here, put it on my back. I will hold it." Sky Woman bent and spread the mud with her hands across the shell of the turtle. Moved by the extraordinary gifts of the animals, she sang in thanksgiving and then began to dance, her feet caressing the earth. The land grew, and as she danced her thanks from that dab of mud on the turtle's back until the whole world was made, not by Sky Woman alone, but by the alchemy of all animals' gifts coupled with her deep gratitude. Together they formed what we now know as Turtle Island, our home. Like any good guest, Sky Woman had not come empty-handed. The bundle was still clutched in her hand. When she toppled from the hole in the sky world, she had reached out and grabbed onto the tree of life that grew there. In her hand were branches and fruits and seeds of all kinds of plants. She then scattered onto the new ground and carefully tended each one until the world turned from brown to green. Sunlight streamed down through the hole from the sky world, allowing the seeds to flourish. Wild grasses, flowers, trees, and medicine spread everywhere. And now that the animals too had something and lots to eat, many of them came to live with her on Turtle Island. I believe that this is the best way to describe Indigenous culture. She didn't create the world. She did it through gratitude and appreciation, and she embraced the gifts that were given to her by the plants and the animals. And we live in perpetual gratitude ever since. And I want to thank you guys for listening to me, and I wish I could stay for questions, but I think you guys are started on your journey, and I wish you guys all the best. Merci.
So I want to say deeply and sincerely thank you, Stryker, for that. I want to thank you for staying and letting us take the time to listen to the story. I think that was an important part of the journey that we're on. We have sessions to go to this afternoon. Please take Stryker's words with you through the afternoon, through the weekend, through the summer. I appreciate that we now have these sorts of spaces where we listen to the stories from Indigenous cultures and from each other. So I think, as Liz was saying, the world is a topsy-turvy place, but there are also some beautiful things happening, and I think the openness and listening to these kinds of messages and stories is important. I thank you for your patience and for receiving the stories. Thank you for bringing your wisdom to us.